In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, one God, Amen. I really don't know what to say about this gospel. The traditional way of talking about it is, it was a historical event. It occurred. And Lazarus was the last that Jesus raised from the dead. The first was a little girl, the second was the son of the widow of Nain, and the third was Lazarus of Bethany, the sister, the brother of Mary and Martha. And he was the one who was the most profoundly dead. You know, dead is an absolute situation. If you're dead, you're dead. It's not, you can't be a little dead. You're dead. But as the gospel speaks, they were worried because this time decay was to have set in. That's why the body would begin to give off a terrible odor because of decomposition. So the Lord did these things in order that He may show prior to His own resurrection that in the flesh He had the power over life and death. But what I want to talk to you really about is how it pertains to you and me today. This was a historical event, and I can go into a long interpretation of the events having to do with the historicity and what it means because of His command over these elements. But you see, God was present at each one of these cases, whether they were a case that was subtle, in the case of the little girl who was in a room by herself, or the case where it was open, the man was being carried aloft in a coffin, or whether he had already been entombed. In each case, Jesus was present. Now we know that the Lord Jesus Christ is present with us always. But we don't like to think about some people in our midst, or people that we know, or people in our families are dead. Really dead. That means entirely separated from God. Do you know excommunication really means that you have been without, except if it's by through obedience. I have to make this. Unless it's through obedience. You are excommunicated if you have not had communion in 40 days. In greater than a period of 40 days. This is excommunication. Ex means without. Communion. Excommunication is without communion. You have to come to the altar and you have to take communion. Now there are some who are disciplined. For example, women. A woman who gives birth to a son will be without communion for 40 days. If she gives birth to a daughter, she will be without communion for 80 days. But should she die in this period of time, it will be as though she had had communion. Because this is a discipline, and in her obedience, she is going to be received as though her condition was a normal condition. So we don't put women in jeopardy because they give birth. This would be an unthinkable thing. But for us to stay away from communion, to not go, it's a terrible separation. You know, think about if somebody put a lock on your refrigerator door. Yeah, and then you want to get your food. It's your food. You are invited to eat the food in your own house. You are invited, you know, and it is just as important to the soul. It is important to the soul to have the food from the Lord's table as it is the table that we prepare ourselves carnally. And so, what does it mean on a functional level to be dead? Well, we don't forget people who are dead, usually. I guess there are some you've forgotten. But we don't forget people who are dead. We may have pictures of them. We may We may weep and we may have very tender recollections of events that have occurred in our lives that we favor at certain times to recall, and even though it puts us in a situation of hunger for them and a desire for reconciliation which we cannot bridge, we continue to do that according to our will. We remember, and in the commemoration of the saints and in the reflection on the lives of the martyrs and the Synaxarion, we believe that we are, although we can't have direct contact, that we are in a committed relationship with them, that the church on earth is not separated from the church in heaven. But to be dead spiritually means a state where the things that I would like to share with you and I would like to have with you, you cannot participate in. You can't participate in them because you're not one with me. And you're not one with me because your understanding of Christ is not the same as mine. So we can't have communion with people that call themselves Christians even though they're Roman Catholics. And we cannot have communion with other Orthodox even though they call themselves Greeks or Russians or Antiochians. Because you do not believe the way. You are in a very real sense dead to me. I cannot be part of your family. We do not believe the same way. Well, there are some people that will say this: the humanity of my brother is more important than the theology of my God. Really? Because you're going to get a chance to say that to him. You're going to get a chance to say that to him. When you see him, you will be able to say, I am a great person, and I love people. And because of my love for people is so great that I will accept people and I will reject what you have taught and what you have revealed. I say, oh, well. Then the Lord will look at you and He'll say, you, my friend, have done so at your peril. The reason that I have given you the Bible and the reason that I have given you the fathers, the doctors of the church, to teach, St. John Chrysostom, St. Athanasius, St. Cyril, the Cappadocians, the reason I have given you all these fathers, and you are ignorant of them at your peril, you are ignorant of them as you are ignorant of, oh, well, you see that bottle over there in the medicine cabinet that has the skull and crossbones on it? It means poison. And if you are ignorant of that sign and you drink, well, and if you've seen any TV programs in the last 2-3 years, you will find out that many people have tried to kill others because of antifreeze, the stuff that you put in your car. It happens to taste sweet. And I guess if you mix it with lemonade or Kool-Aid or orangeade, a lot of people can't taste the difference. So they drink it and it kills them. So if you're ignorant of that, a little dose of antifreeze will do the job. I'm using kind of silly comparisons, but to think that we can, because of our flesh, make decisions about who is dead and who isn't dead, right? Because it's not an absolute case that we recognize. Because we are just ignorant. Now, why isn't somebody ignorant about the state of death? Well, in the Middle Ages, people were really scared that a catatonic state might exist. And so in coffins, they put little bells. That the dead, if they weren't actually dead, and when they were put in the tomb, they could pull on this little thing and it would ring a bell and it would bring somebody to get them out. Because there were cases of people, a catatonic state mimics death. It looks like you're dead because you are not breathing very regularly. Your heartbeat may be very irregular, but in fact you still are alive. Now this is very infrequent, but most of us can recognize a dead person. I've seen lots of dead people, not in dreams, but because I go to houses where dead people are. And sometimes before the people come, you know, to take them away, the coroner or whoever it happens to be, Forest Lawn, and I will say a prayer over the person. And it doesn't bother me to kiss the dead. You know, they don't have any extra germs. You've got as many germs as they have. And so, but let me tell you, they don't look good. None of them look good. First of all, they look gray. Really, really gray. And if they've been laying there for any period of time, the bottom side of them is purple, because that's where the blood settles. So it looks like they have been beat up and are black and blue. It really looks not too good. So we recognize that. But it's more discreet to look at somebody who's dead but is still walking around. If you think about the book by H.P. Lovecraft called The Reanimator, and any zombie movie you ever saw, there's the appearance of life, there's mobility, but they're dead. They're dead. A dead person spiritually is a person who does not have the right faith and is not communing at the altar for the right reason. You can be going to the altar and you can be taking the bread of life, and you do so at your own peril because you have not been a clear witness even to yourself in the privacy of your own mind about who God is and what He demands of you. And so you think, I'm okay, I'm just fine. You do that at your own peril. And that's what we talk about, taking communion unworthily. And the first way in which that is done, it's done because you are aware of a sin in your life that you are embarrassed or ashamed to admit you're having a problem with. You do not have to be sin-free in order to take communion. But you have to be absolutely certain you want to rid yourself of the sin. You have to ask the Lord to help rid you of the sin, and you have to be fighting the sin yourself. It's like when two pugilists get into a ring in a boxing match and they start to fight. Each one thinks when they go in there that there is going to, you know, they know. Well, sometimes it ends in a draw. Nobody likes that. But most of the time there's a winner and a loser. Each one thinks they're going to win. Well, in the fight against sin, as long as you fight with all of your power against the thing that you have confessed, the Lord will count you as a winner. And whether or not it takes you, for example, in the life of St. Anthony, he was having the sin of lust. If you can imagine St. Anthony. This is the life that was written by St. Athanasius. And he struggled with this sin for 3 years. And it's written exactly, I repeat this, some of you know the story. He was as though he was one being burned alive. That's how much he was fighting the sin. It was like he was on fire. He was diligent. He was fighting. I'm not going to do that anymore. He was fighting. But it took 3 years in the life of St. Anthony to get over this lustful situation before the Lord relieved him of it. At the end of his life, he was able to say, I no longer fear God. The Lord even gave him that. And he said, why? Because I love God, and perfect love casts out fear. So the claim he was making for himself that he had the perfect love of God. Well, this is something that we may aspire to and may even attain if it's by the grace of the Lord. But it is certainly because we are struggling and we are fighting. So, the first thing is that you have to be aware of who Jesus is and what your church teaches and what the doctors of the church teach. And when you are in line with that, although you may be fallible, you will still be accepted. But if you decide that you are going to create even one line of your own theology, if you are going to decide and make one interpretation of the rule by yourself on your own, then you are the same as the heretics that the church has cast out. We must be in obedience, and we must be together. And we cannot, for the sake of our common humanity, say, I understand your situation, malish, it's okay, calm. You can't do that. You cannot do that, ever. And it does not matter if it's your child, or your grandchild, or your husband, or your wife, or your brother, or your sister, or your cousin. It doesn't matter what the degree of the relationship is. It matters only your faithfulness, your fidelity to the Lord Jesus Christ and His truth through the church, as understood by the doctors. And when I say doctors, I mean those who give prescriptive advice about how to live in this world. And you do not add one line that comes from your own mind. The only thing that you do is try to absorb what was revealed. This is the structure. This is the house of God, and He has very strict rules. And anybody who doesn't is dead. Now, Jesus can raise those from the dead whom He chooses. He can choose to raise people from the dead that you would never think in a million years were going to be raised from the dead. He can have His mercy where He will have His mercy, but you cannot cause Him to bend His knee, or to extend His hand, or to do one merciful act simply because you think it should be done. He will, in His own essence, make that decision. Why? Because He's not something that is blown about by other forces. There's no sense of polity, like if we get together as a group, we can raise our hands and make a decision and then He will be bound to follow it. No. 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 Now the priest has been given some discretionary power. And this power is a terrible power. The priest can, it's written when the Lord was sitting at the table with His disciples, whose sins you remit are remitted. That means if I say you are forgiven, you are forgiven. And the sins that are retained mean I say you are not forgiven. They shall be retained. Now what does that mean? They shall be retained until the very last moment of your life, so that you have a chance to be forgiven. In other words, mercy will come immediately, but the penalty of judgment will not come till your very last breath. So you have, even as the thief on the cross, you have the chance to seek God's mercy. But you do that by realizing what the truth is, declaring the truth in your own personal confession, and saying anything that I did that was not compatible or within the bounds of this truth, anything that I did that was not compatible or within the bounds of this truth, I repudiate. I say to you now, I am a sinner. I violated the law, and it is wrong. Then I live. Then I live. But you cannot live, and you will perish if you're holding on to something, just like the guy who's in the middle of the water and he's holding on to something heavy and he sinks like a stone. You have to let go. You must let go of everything that you think that is inimical with the Lord's own revelation through the Bible by the church, as interpreted by the mouths of the holy doctors, St. Cyril, St. Athanasius, St. John Chrysostom, the Cappadocians, etc. Those great fathers. And that's how we live. And the difference between the living and the dead is not who you like and who you don't like. It's not who's related to you or who's not related to you. The Lord Jesus Christ said, "Who is my mother?" or "Who are my brothers and sisters?" And he said clearly, "Those who do the will of God." So the thing about Lazarus is, the Lord loved him, but it didn't save Lazarus from dying. Do you understand? Because the Lord loved him, because the Lord loved Mary and Martha, it didn't save their brother from death. What saved the brother from death was the confession of faith. "I know that you are the Christ." He said, "Do you believe? Do you believe?" So, she said, "Yes, I believe." And then he said, "Lazarus, come forth. Did I not say to you that if you would believe, you would see the glory of God?" Did I not say this? You have to believe. You have to have the faith. But all will die unless you believe. And some are already dead amongst us. But we can do what the advocates of those two women did for their brother. We can go and we can treat every man as our brother and every woman as our sister or aunt and uncle, mother or father, and we can go to them and say, "Awake, come alive. This is the real Christ. Get rid of the opinions you have that do not conform to His will, and then be saved." Glory be to His holy name, both now and ever in the age of ages. Amen.